Thank you.
Test it and see if it.
Test. Is that good? All right. Thank you all. Just going to put this in. So I'm glad that you stayed for our time together in class. Hopefully you've got a little handout that will, there's the official bell. And I've been told 45 minutes, no more. So, all right. My wife's going to help keep me to that. And we're off and running. So I wanted to be a little more casual with you about some things related to building stronger marriages. And I hope that maybe this handout will give you an opportunity, if you're inclined, to jot down a few things. I don't want to force this on anybody, but if this is helpful to you, then please feel free to use it. So as we get started, let me kind of start this session with a little story. You probably have not heard of Lawrence Ripple. Lawrence Ripple was a 71-year-old man that a couple of years ago received national acclaim for what he did. He left his home, went to his local bank in Kansas City, of all places, and robbed it. A 71-year-old man. And so he wrote out a note. He actually wrote out a note when he was home. And the note was something like this: I have a gun, give me money. And so he took that note, handed it to a teller. Obviously, people are kind of shaken. He's got this little bag that, he kind of points to when she's reading about the note and the gun. She digs around, comes up with $2,974 and gives that to him. He takes it and he goes over to one of those benches in a bank lobby, and he sits down. Sits down. When some of those bank people, that kind of security people, came over to him, "What are you doing?" I didn't know what to think. He said, "I'm waiting for the police to come." And shortly they did. They came. It's what happened. And so people are talking and there's a buzz and they describe what's taking place. And they approach him and say, what are you doing? And he said, "I thought I would rob a bank today, wait for you guys to come so that I could land in prison and escape my wife." In fact, he had told his wife, "I would rather be in jail than to be at home with you." And talk about strange and bizarre. So, it goes to trial. The judges, the attorneys are all they get into it and start looking at the case. And really, the guy is pretty harmless. Never done anything like this before. And so the judge decides, "I'm just going to sentence you to 6 months of house arrest." And some of you may feel like you've been in house arrest during this pandemic time. Now, a little more about that story in just a bit. There's a backstory that helps us to understand what's going on. By the way, there was no gun. There were a pair of nail clippers and a hairbrush. So he really was quite harmless. That story at face value says, my goodness, is that what a long-term marriage is going to get me to? No. That's not what I'm talking about today. And so look at item A on your handout. Our goal with what I do with couples, and when I come and teach in churches like this, it's not just marital stability. Stability is that term for they stayed together. And many of you come from a legacy of long-lasting, stable marriages. That's good. That's what we want. But we've all probably seen those situations like Mr. and Ms. Ripple, where they stayed together, but it was anything but happy. So what I'm talking about today, and I don't want to get this kind of mixed up, It's both marital stability and the next blank, marital satisfaction. So we want happy, thriving, long-term marriages. So how do we do that? Well, we're going to look to not just what Scripture says, not that it's not sufficient. It is, but sometimes, like we've spent time this morning in Ephesians 5, well, what does that actually look like in a day-to-day with this issue and this process and that process? And so I've picked out 6 things that have again and again been found to be associated with healthy long-term marriages. And we'll start here. Marathon marriages are comprised of 2 individuals who are emotionally healthy and mature. Now, all of us have a basic mindset. And I'm going to oversimplify this and own it, and that is that we're either bent toward being a positive person or not so positive. And that mindset shapes our interpretations of our mate and of different life experiences, work, etc. Here's what we've discovered. Happy couples that stay together decide to be happy. That is a choice that we make. Life does not always cooperate, but we can decide, we can choose to be happy if we will take responsibility for our own happiness. In fact, one researcher from UCLA found that a couple's joy is fundamentally tied to each partner's ability to adjust to things beyond their control. Hasn't that happened in the last 6 to 8 months? And by the way, there are 3 mindsets that I want you to guard against. These always get us in trouble. Here's the first. It's self-pity. Oh, poor me. No, not only does that get in the way of you being an active problem solver, but it also kind of puts other people on the outs with you. Well, I don't want to be around them. They're always in this bad mood. They think they've got life so rough. Well, I know 10 people who have life much more difficult. Here's number 2, resentment. Resentment. Now, we do have hurts in our lives. Some of you may still be carrying hurts from your family of origin or old relationships. But we can address them. We can name them for what they are. We can work through them. And here's the last, and that's blame. A mindset of blame that fails to take responsibility is not going to allow for growth. And it's actually going to push your partner away from you. So ask yourself this question. This might even be helpful for you to jot down. What is it like to be married to me? What would it be like to be married to me? Listen to these words from Paul found over in Philippians chapter 4, beginning in verse 11. I'm not saying this because I'm in need, for I've learned to be content, whatever the circumstances, knowing that I know what it is to be in need, I know what it is to have plenty, and I've learned the secret of being content in any and every situation. Have we learned that? It's not an easy lesson to learn. All right, let's go to the second one. Here's another characteristic of marathon marriages. What I find and what other research studies find, and I think this is supported by general principles in Scripture, marathon marriages are intentional. They are intentional about their relationship. Some of you men and women are in business. And there may have been something, if you were in a management or leadership position, you may have had discussions with board of trustees or kind of management groups about something called organizational drift, where things just kind of slide. Churches experience that. They just drift. So do marriages. We get busy. We get focused on other things of building a life. And that marriage that we invested in so much, and think about the time when you dated, how intentional you were in that particular period of your life. And then it's kind of like autopilot. And the marriage begins to drift. You see, most marriages don't break up because there's some big explosion, big event, big failure. Most marriages that fail because they gradually drift apart, because spouses weren't intentional. And those things we get busy with, work, kids, community involvement, church involvement, those are all good things. But we have to prioritize that important thing of our marriage relationship. So what can you be intentional about? Here's some things to think about. Spending time together. That can be very difficult during the building years when there's kids in the home, young kids, and especially as they move up through elementary school and then into middle school and high school, and you're doing all their activities, and you've got to take them, and you're building careers, and then it just has to be done. Some couples that I know have date nights that are pretty regular. Others involve themselves in shared activities. Here's the next thing we need to be intentional about. Talking with each other. Talking with each other. And that's not a once a week thing. Hopefully we're able to do that some each day beyond the perfunctory, hey, we've got this tonight, this is what we're having for supper, etc. Some go a step further than that, and they'll go ahead and establish what's called a couple meeting. That once a week, or maybe once every 2 weeks, we're going to get together, we're going to protect this 30 minutes, we're going to check in, we're going to kind of look at schedules, we're going to talk about things that are going well, we're going to talk about other. It's not a problem-focused session. It is intentional to reconnect. All right, go to the next bullet under that about what we can be intentional about. Addressing issues. Don't let issues hang around. Because what happens? The issue doesn't get solved, then it becomes a problem. Then if the problem's not addressed or addressed well, then it becomes kind of a point of dissension and it creates resentment. Then we start kind of getting apart. By the way, there's a very biblical principle with this, and it's found in Acts 6. When we saw the issue with the Grecian widows, immediately the apostles set to the task, what do we need to do to keep this church from dividing? And it would have been a big racial, cultural divide. Some are getting food, some are not. This is a race thing. So we address it quickly. And then last, we plan for growth and renewal. We're intentional about those times that are a little bit bigger. We're thinking, what do we need to do about this as we look to this next year, as we look to the next couple of years? We have some couple friends back in Texas that ever so often, actually it's pretty regular, each year they'll go on a little weekend trip. And it's not just to sightsee and to relax. They do some of that, but it's specifically, where are we? How are we doing? How's the families doing? And then let's point ahead. It doesn't have to be expensive. I don't want you to think, we can't do that. We don't have enough money. Okay, let kids stay with grandma or stay with friends, and you just spend that day, night together talking about that. I want you to look at a text over in Ephesians chapter 5. It's not the marriage text, but it's one that I think has, it's kind of like, creates a type of reality check with us, not just about this issue in marriage, but about all of our focus. So Ephesians chapter 5, verse 15. Be careful then how you live, not as unwise, but as wise, making the most of every opportunity, because the days are evil. Do not be foolish, but understand what the Lord's will is. Some translations will say, redeem the time. That's what you're doing in your marriage when you're being intentional. And what we see is that those marathon marriages are good about being intentional. Here's number 3. Let's keep going. It's item D. Marathon marriages involve partners who work together as a team. Partners who work together as a team. And I know we've got all kinds of generations here in this auditorium right now. And so you're going to have different ways of doing gender roles and household responsibilities. You know, he may cook more than she does. That probably doesn't fit most of our homes. He may do this with the kids and she may do this. And so I need to touch a little bit on this for just a minute. Just a couple of points to consider. Wives who work outside the home, and raise your hand, ladies, if you do that. You work outside the home, plus you have home responsibilities. Many times, wives who work outside the home come home to a second shift. What we know is that wives do about 2/3 of the household responsibilities. When kids come along, they do more than that. And by the way, don't just think about cooking and cleaning and washing, and those are all very important and they're timely and they create fatigue. But there's also two other areas that we're focused on now. It's called mental work and emotion work. Who does that in your family? Let me explain. Mental work. Who keeps the schedule? Who makes sure everybody's organized? This is what's going to happen. This may even kind of bleed over into the bills. Maybe it's a shared thing. Maybe it's more this person. In my family growing up, that was more of my mom's responsibility. And then the emotion work. The emotion work is when somebody gets upset or hurt. Who do they go to? Who provides more of the, I'm so sorry, what are we going to do? And let me put that on you. And who does that? Hopefully it's shared. But think, if that also falls more to her, plus the other 2/3 stuff, that's a lot. That's a whole lot. So, here's a couple of things for you to jot down. Perceptions of fairness regarding responsibility. Perceptions. How does she perceive it? Is it fair in her mind? Is it fair in his mind? Are a better predictor or are more of a predictor of satisfaction than the actual behavior. Now, she may still be doing more, but if her way of conceptualizing this is what should happen, he's doing this, I'm doing this is all right and good. That's why some of you think, wow, I couldn't do it the way my grandparents did it. Okay, it's a different generational cohort. If it works for them, great. But if it's not working, if the perception of fairness on either part, most of the time it's the woman who perceives it not being fair, it's going to impact the couple's satisfaction. And here's another one. Go to the next one. The wife's perception of equality is the most predictive of the couple's satisfaction. You want to have a highly satisfying marriage, guys? She needs to have a voice in what's going on. She needs to have power. She needs to sense that this is fair, that there's a sense of equality that exists. So, a couple of quick questions. I would encourage you to talk about this maybe sometime during the week. Do you feel satisfied with how we've distributed responsibilities? and then you can share about whether or not you feel satisfied. But if one of you doesn't feel satisfied, especially her, that's probably an area to work with. Being a spiritual leader in the home, guys, does not mean that she doesn't share in the power. Okay? You empower her. That is a biblical perspective of leadership. You don't lord it over, as the Matthew 20 text described. And that's Jesus talking. Don't lord it over them like this particular group. Okay. All right, go to number E. This is where you'll probably think, I thought that would be on the list. So marathon marriages are characterized by healthy communication practices. And oh my goodness, we could go so many different directions with this. I'll just highlight a few. In most healthy marriages, there are 3 characteristics of the communication. It's open. In other words, we can talk about different issues. Things are not off the subject. It's not like, oh, can't talk about that. No, you can. Number 2, communication is clear. You say what you mean, and you mean what you say. We'll talk more about that in a minute. And the third, and this is where I want to land initially, and it's positive. It is positive more than negative. One researcher that I think has done a terrific job of kind of laying groundwork for what's involved in healthy marriages, his name is John Gottman, has found that we need, this is a good principle for all of us, 5 positives for every 1 negative to keep that marital bank account moving in a positive direction. If it drops to, well, let's say 2-to-1 or 1-to-1, well, here's a negative and here's a positive. That's going to spell probably a lot of dissatisfaction and probably push the couple further away from each other. But if it's 5-to-1, 6, 8, 10-to-1, positives to negatives, that opens the door. Here's another thing that healthy couples do. They navigate and negotiate gender differences. Have you discovered that men and women communicate differently? She connects, and I realize I'm generalizing here, okay? So I don't push this on all people, but in general, she communicates through shared conversation. Can we talk? He tends to connect through shared activity. Can we go do this? She shares and often wants primarily to be heard and validated. He thinks if you're sharing with me, you want help fixing a problem you have. She shares and wonders, why doesn't he share with me like I share with him? In fact, that's the most common complaint that we see with couples in this area of communication. Why doesn't he open up with me? But for guys, that gets way too close to vulnerability and weakness. And so we're not prone to open up. At least those of us who are a little bit older, kind of our younger generation of guys, that's not as much of an issue with. Here's another thing that we know that's present in most of the marathon marriages, and that is that the partners listen, but for a particular reason. They listen to understand. They listen to understand. And I should put a kind of a sub-point under that, and not to win. It's not like, okay, this is your approach, this is the argument. No, this is the right way. I'm trying to understand your thoughts, your feelings, your preferences, your desires, your hurts, etc. So there's some skills. If we were doing this in more of like a weekend conference and we had several classes or maybe a retreat, I would have you all practice some of these skills, like speaker-listener skills. And we might do a little bit of role play and kind of do that, but that wasn't really appropriate for this kind of setting. So it's more ideas and discussion, but hopefully it prompts you to maybe seek out those opportunities, whether it's an individual type of situation with a minister or a counselor, or it's participating in a marriage education, marriage enrichment event or series. One last thing here about communication that I think is really important to understand, and that is that partners in healthy marriages don't make their spouses guess or mind read. What does she really mean? What's he doing? We go ahead and we share what we're thinking or feeling or wanting. And this really gets at two things. Self-disclosure. Guys are not so good at that. Women tend to be better. And assertiveness. Guys are often a little better than that than ladies. Assertiveness is not the same as aggressive communication. It's not ugly. It's not disrespectful. It's simply saying, I feel, I think, I want. It's big time with I language. It's communicating your desires. Here's the story. I think Elizabeth will be okay. I'm going to share it about her mom. Kind of back several years when her biological mother was still living, her mom was going to have to go in for a real, not a very big day surgery thing. Elizabeth's dad is worked with oil companies. He's an engineer, loves to hunt. He had planned a hunting trip, and it coincided with the weekend or the Friday that she was going to have the surgery. The girls were home, Elizabeth and her sister, and Bill, my father-in-law, asked my mother-in-law, do you want me to stay? And Sarah said, no, that's fine. The girls are here. Was he supposed to stay? Yeah. Did she kind of stew on that for a few days? Did he kind of realize that after the hunting trip? Yeah. Tell them what you want, what you think, what you feel. It's okay. You don't have to agree on everything. And I think that's a great principle here. You're not trying to always problem solve. What you're trying to do is understand. Remember, two things. This isn't on there, but I think it's a really good, helpful principle to keep in mind. Are we engaging in problem discussion or problem solution? And my bias is you always start with problem discussion. So do we understand what each other is saying and wanting and how they view this particular issue? If you go straight to problem solution, there's a good chance you're not going to understand what each other's views or feelings or wants are. In fact, a lot of things never have to reach that stage of problem solving if we just better understood each other. Okay, let me real quickly jump to James chapter 1 and verse 19. I think a great principle for us to kind of be aware of as we think about communication. And you see the other passages there. We won't read those, but know that you can kind of do some studying and reading and pondering about those as we move forward. Verse 19, my dear brothers, take note of this. I guess it must be pretty important. I mean, he's even prefacing what he's writing. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. What a great principle for married couples. All right, let's go to the next one. So this would be item F. Marriages manage conflict effectively. They manage conflict effectively. Again, if we were doing this in a different context, we'd be able to actually show you what this looked like in role plays. And I was a little bit uncomfortable trying to do this here, not knowing you and you not knowing me. But I'll talk about some things that we're going to refer to as, as danger signs. In fact, jot that in with the first blank there. All couples are going to have fights or disagreements or misunderstandings. But those couples that are the healthiest, that thrive, they avoid what is referred to as the danger signs. That term actually comes from the University of Denver. Gottman, who I mentioned, is at the University of Washington. Notice the term that he uses, the four horsemen of the apocalypse. That should tell you how serious they are. Here's really the bottom line about this. These danger signs, these patterns are dealing with conflict. They've done longitudinal research where they observe and videotape couples over many years, sometimes as long as 15 or 20 years. And both of those universities have come to the place where they could identify which couples are going to divorce with 80 to 94% accuracy. Is your weatherman that good? Is your football prognosticator that good? I mean, in the behavioral sciences, you never find predictive factors that high. And so what are we talking about here? Well, before we do that, I want to add one more thing. Those danger signs, in other words, what I'm about to go into with that list of conflict patterns, is strongly associated with depression in women. So if these ways of dealing with conflict are present in a relationship, don't be surprised if she's not experiencing some depression. Then one more that I know this is going to get the attention of some of you that are parents of young children. These patterns of conflict are very destructive to kids. Now, don't hear me saying, see there, I thought we should divorce. No. See there, we need to get some help and work past this. When these patterns are present, kids tend to become sad and angry, and they start making negative interpretations of others that they interact with, their teachers, their friends, because they see us having those negative interpretations as well. So what are they? One is escalation. So I can't go into great depth with this here. Let me give you a couple of books, or let me give you one book that I think can be two books. One, they come from the same place. One is called Fighting for Your Marriage. Fighting for Your Marriage. That's out of the University of Denver. It's a longer book, but it's very readable. And it describes those patterns and how to get out of them. Now, one of the guys at the University of Denver is a Christian. And so he's taken that material, the research they've done, and he and some other Christian authors have written a book called A Lasting Promise. It's shorter, and it covers most of the same things. If you look to the University of Washington group, John Gottman would be the person, and he usually does like 7 habits or 7 principles for highly effective marriages, things like that. It's very easy to Google that. So if you need more, that would be where I'd go. So escalation is, it's kind of like a tit for tat. You say something negative, they say something negative, and it keeps on escalating. Sometimes it begins with just criticism. It's not super bad. I would call it junior varsity. It's junior varsity fighting. But at times, it moves to, see on that second line, contempt. That's the varsity. And not only that, that's top 10 in the state. And what's going on there is I'm picking out things that I know are really going to cut through the core and hurt you. I know what your sensitive parts are. So I'm going to kind of make you feel bad about yourself. So not a good thing. Sometimes it occurs with invalidation. Invalidation where we don't validate what a partner is saying or what they're feeling. Sometimes that occurs with, it'd be like this example. A dad stays home and mom goes to work, or she's got responsibilities on a Saturday morning. He's supposed to take care of the kids. She's asked him to take care of a few things around the home. He works primarily in the bedroom and in the living room or den, but some dishes kind of pile up in the sink. He's done a really bang-up job in his mind with these other things and kept the kids happy to boot. She comes in, walks through the kitchen first, sees the dishes that haven't been dealt with, and immediately before she sees something else, oh my goodness, don't you ever think about anybody besides yourself? I've been working all morning, and what is this? And he thinks, after all the hard work I did, I would have thought that I would at least get a thank you. But she picked out this one thing that I didn't do. That's a good example of invalidation. Here's the next one, negative interpretations. All of us kind of have thoughts and assumptions and beliefs about everything. Our work, church, friends, family of origin, but that also goes on with our spouses. That was nice of her to do. I bet she just does that to make me mad. Here we go again. I bet this is going to end like this. We're constantly making interpretation. When they become negative, it kind of drives couples apart, and it leads to negative kinds of interaction and communication. Go to the next one, defensiveness. This is an interesting but very sad thing to see in couples where nobody takes response. You were supposed to pay the bills. No, this is your month. You're supposed to pay. No, it's yours. And it's just a bunch of cross-complaining and excuse-making and yes-butting. The issue doesn't get solved. And then lastly, the two terms, stonewalling and pursuit withdrawal. They're talking about the same thing. And this is extraordinarily damaging to couples. The most common scenario is this. There's an issue that one of the partners, generally the female, feels like we need to talk about. We need to get this addressed. So she pursues him to try to, we need to talk. I don't have time. I need to do this with the car. I've got to go. And we planned this golf outing or whatever. When are we going to be able to talk about this? So the more she pursues, the more he withdraws. The more he withdraws, the more she pursues. Now, can it be flipped? He pursues, she withdraws? Yes. But it's commonly the other way. In fact, there's been research on that as well. 86% of the time, the partner who's stonewalling or withdrawing is the man. And it's not because he doesn't love her or want the marriage to work. He does that because he thinks this is not going to end well. We're going to have conflict. This is going to create problems. I just need to kind of get out of this. It is so common. Can it occur in other relationships? Absolutely. It can occur in parent-child relationships as well. Pursue, withdraw. The more you pursue, the more you withdraw. Who comes to see a counselor? the pursuer. And what do they often have to be encouraged to do? Slow down. Give him a chance. The more that she takes the foot off the pedal, in a healthy relationship, generally he'll start to approach her. Now, if you can get the husband to come too, we can coach him up. Yeah, you've got to talk to her about this. This is really a big deal. Okay, well, how can we make it safe? See what we're doing here with all of this conflict issue? It has to be safe for couples to connect. And in your mind right now, if you're thinking, boy, it's not too safe right now for us, then that may be a signal that you need to visit with somebody. And that's a good thing. That's not a bad thing. It can change. Okay. Here's the last couple of things. We'll go quick. So marathon marriages also tend to cultivate a shared vision for their family. A shared vision. This is often rooted in a shared faith. That's why we spent so much time talking about those things this morning. And this also connects to our topic for this evening. Research clearly shows that shared faith couples tend to stay married longer and they tend to be more satisfied. That's like they're playing our song. Now again, that's not, she's super invested. She's really devoted. And he's, if it doesn't get in the way of these 4 or 5 things. It's both committed, devoted. And then I want to go just a step further with that. There is some powerful research coming out today about couples who prayed together. And I'm not going to ask for discussion from you, but talk about this. This is not easy, but some of the research is saying that couples who pray together are twice as likely to see their marriage as highly romantic. Twice as likely to see their marriage as highly romantic. And this one's even more surprising. Couples who pray together are 90% more likely to report higher satisfaction in their sex life. Than couples who don't pray together. See, there's this amazing connection between prayer and sex. Both are deeply personal, and it causes us to be very vulnerable. And when a man is willing to be vulnerable with his mate in the context of prayer, it even opens her heart more and makes her more comfortable being vulnerable with him in the bedroom. All right, last thing that I want you to be aware of is that marathon marriages are characterized by dedication commitment than by constraint commitment. See, there are different types of commitment. Some couples stay committed because, well, I don't have enough money to do this, or my parents would think this, or the church would think that, or it doesn't coincide, it doesn't square with my beliefs. And those are good things. Or it would be too much trouble, or how would I manage the kids alone? Those are constraints. And see, all marriages, even the happiest marathon marriages, have constraints. But the happy marathon marriages don't focus on that. They focus on being dedicated to one another, of seeing a long-term vision, of being with that spouse. In fact, that's where I want us to end today, or for this session. Let me be very personal with you about this. You may not have been around very many marathon marriages. You may have seen breakup after breakup and heartache after heartache. You may even doubt your ability to make it for that long, 50, 60 years, like we heard this morning with the announcements that some of your couples are celebrating. But I want to offer you a word of encouragement. And it will begin this way, that almost all marathon marriages have had seasons of doubt and hardship where the couple, both partners, thought, is this going to work? Should I stay? Am I going to be miserable for the rest of my life? You see, we're not after the Lawrence Ripple marriage. I want you to see it from a different perspective. So go with me to a time in the future. Some of you, especially those of you who haven't been married all that many years, this is especially for you. Those of you who are in your 40s and 50s, 60s and 70s, you've already started experiencing some of this. I want you to see yourself, if you're married, as an older couple. You're gathered around family. And it's a happy occasion, maybe something like Thanksgiving, and football's on, and there's great food, and people are laughing, and you're enjoying the beautiful fall weather, and the grandkids are there, and the children. And you look around the room, and you see the smiles. You hear the laughter. And you and your spouse are so happy about what you've built with God's help. And in that scene, you think to yourself, I am so happy that I stayed, that we worked on this, that we made these improvements. You look at your spouse and you think, we are so blessed, so very blessed. And as you look around the room and you see the smiles of the grandchildren and the children, and as they look to you in admiration and gratitude, it occurs to you what you've done. You've left them with a marriage legacy that they can strive for. And with God's help and the support of this good church, the two of you can be one of those that we've been talking about this morning, a marathon marriage. God bless you. Hope to see you this evening.